Hello everyone and welcome to the first ever code review of this channel. So today we are going to take a look at this OpenGL project by Nicholas. So let's start with a quick backstory. This guy was learning OpenGL and he had quite the same problem that most people that learn OpenGL have. And that is that he managed to make a triangle and then even get to 3D stuff. But then he was quite, stuck. Like he was able to do the 3D part, but he didn't really understand everything. And also, it's not like he was able to do that from memory. Um, Not that it's really important, but still, he felt quite stuck. Like he felt like he didn't quite understand everything that was going on. And I think everyone that's learning OpenGL eventually gets to this problem, including myself. I also was in this situation. And the solution is quite simple. You just have to make some more projects. So after you make your first triangle, or maybe even after you do some 3D stuff, you just have to remake that again a few times. Like just stay again with the tutorial, look again at the source code and stuff like that, do some projects, and you will eventually manage to learn the basics of OpenGL and understand them very well. So that's what I told him. I told him to make a project, like a game. And so he asked me what game to make, and well, the answer was simple. A game that doesn't have collisions, because 3D collisions are quite hard to do. So, the first game that came to mind was to make a space game. Because you are just floating in space, and yeah, sure, you can implement some simple collisions with asteroids, like if you are too close to them, you get hit. And that's what we have here. So let's start first with the GitHub page. I know you can't wait to get into the code review itself. We'll get there. But let's first start with the GitHub page because that's also important. A lot of beginners make their repositories private, and that's not okay. Like, you want people to find your projects. Like, I know some of you might think that they have some cool projects and they need to hide them for some whatever reason, like maybe you don't want AI to train on your projects, or you don't want other people to steal your code, but you really need to lower down your ego. Like, it's quite comical if you think about it. Right now you are just a beginner. Like, not to trash on your code or anything, but if you are a beginner, it's not going to be good. Okay, we'll look at Nicolas' code right now. It seems quite okay, but I don't think it's like anyone has anything to steal from this code. You know what I mean? Like, there's no point in him hiding his code here. So instead, you should make your repository public so that other people can see what you are doing. Like, I met so many cool people in this way just by making my repositories public. And it's also like your CV, right? Like, if someone wants to know, okay, so who is this guy Nicholas? Like, what's his expertise in programming? Well, you can see he has quite some repositories, most of them C++. And then this one that we are looking at right now seems to be a 3D game, and we have a photo here. So yeah, like, you can take a look here and see, like, hey, this guy Nicholas has some stuff going for himself, right? So quick tip: if you go here to edit this file, you can drag and drop photos here. So yeah, well, GitHub is taking forever to load because it's a Microsoft product. If you didn't know that, that's why it's so horrible. But you can drag and drop a photo here, and it's very important to do that, to drag a screenshot of your game, because no one will actually spend the time to compile your game. Probably they can't even do that if you didn't set up it correctly. So you want to have a photo so people can quickly see, like, what your project is about. And yeah, we are just going to give up loading the README because... Okay. Now, looking at the code structure, it seems okay. There are some... Maybe, it's a little bit weird that main is not in src, but it's here. But it's not really a big deal. Then we have the src folder with all the files. which I really like. Very simple. And then we have this folder for all the dependencies, and then this folder for all the resources like files and 3D models, stuff like that. So quite organized. But the thing that I like most about this setup is that he has a clean git ignore. Like your git ignore should be a few lines, something like this. If you know those git ignore generators where you like type your technologies, like C++, Visual Studio, and then they generate like a big enormous files with like a lot of entries. Like that's not okay. You need to have your setup so that everything that you don't care about is generated in a few folders, like you can see here. So then your git ignore will naturally be very simple, like it is here. So that's very nice. Now, I also like the CMake itself because it's very simple. So your CMake again should be super simple and easy to understand. Like it has 100 lines of code, that's all, and most of them are just adding these files here. That's it. So if you need some CMake help, you can also search for my videos. I also have some CMake setups already made, so if you search like low-level game dev, I linked all the libraries for you on YouTube. You'll find that. And also I have some CMake tutorials because I teach CMake differently. People use CMake in a horrible way, but it's not the case for this project. And that's very nice. Like CMake should be super simple and easy to understand. Also, you can see that he placed all the dependencies in the repo directly, which is something that I really like because it means it's super easy to download the repo and just compile it. There's literally no benefit in having submodules and stuff like that. It actually makes things harder for you because now I can easily modify these files if I need to, and you basically can't fail in compiling the project. You just download it and everything is there. Yeah. So let's actually first run the game to see like where we are. And we are in a debug build, by the way. And it's running pretty well, which is a good sign. Yeah, so we can see we have a simple skybox. The camera is locked, you can only move forward. And you have to avoid these random asteroids, which there are quite many of them. And the game is still running pretty smooth in debug mode, which is very nice to see. Yeah, from a gameplay perspective, it's obviously extremely hard, but I like this, like as some of the first 3D OpenGL project you can do. This is something very good. So let's, yeah, and he also has some text here, which is extremely horrible and hard to implement. He told me that he used a little AI help to implement text, which is totally understandable. Text rendering is not only horrible, but I mean, it's not extremely horrible, but it's very hard to find some information online of how to actually implement it. So I can totally understand like using AI to help you in learning things like this. Okay, now looking at the code, this is the main file. And I actually like this kind of approach where your main file just has the start of the game. Like sure, it depends on the size of your project. But for this project alone, I think it's very well that the project itself is all in this main file. Many people would do something like, they would create a well, Windows is not okay. Windows bugged again for some reason. I wasn't able to type anything here. Okay, so some people would do something like this. They would do some class game, and then they would do the update and stuff here, and then inside main they would do like, oh, game g equals new game and stuff like that, and then they would g.run, and that's the main file. Like, okay, sure, like maybe you want to write that in a class, but like that won't really help you. You know what I mean? Like you just move the responsibility from the main function into the game class. That this won't magically make your code more readable or anything. And also you allocate on the heap for no reason, but you know, like that's just, you know, a cosmetic decision to call it that. There's not really a point in doing that except that maybe you want to write that in a class or something, but I personally prefer it doing like this. Like, you might say, oh yeah, it's more readable to have a main function that only has one line, but that won't tell you anything. Like here you can just, you know, read the code very easily. And yeah, of course, for a more complex project, I usually split it in two files. So I have main that will open the window, and then I have the gameplay, which could be maybe a class or some functions. I usually use functions, but you know, it doesn't really matter. The only thing I would add here to make this a little better would be to add some regions, which looks something like this. So you can type pragma region. So in Visual Studio, you should press tab. So you write this hash symbol and then region, and then press tab. It will make the region for you. Then you can type here, let's say window init. Then, yeah, so this is, let's say this is the init stuff. Then you can collapse this. So this thing won't influence the code itself, but it allows you to collapse the code, something like this. So then you can do something like init shaders and camera, and you know, here will be like load stuff. Here we load the, okay, here we load the stuff, and then we can collapse all of them. And it's like having them in separate functions, but they are not in separate functions. So this is actually helpful because you can't really move these things in separate functions without like having to do some stuff. Like you need this mesh here. Like sure, you can do this if you have a class, but in this case, for example, doing it like this, where everything is inside with this big function, but they are like isolated in these places here, allows you to easily like use variables from this place here later, while also having the code like quite organized and easy to understand. Like you can see like what's happening in every region, and then you do this for you know, a few more places here, and then it will look very nice. So anyway, let's continue. So yeah, you can see it's very procedural and easy to understand. Like it will just it seems like it just has a vector of okay, so okay, quite an weird approach. So it has a vector of objects for each 3D model. I think the idea is that, oh, okay. I think the idea is that each of these 3D models is multiple objects. Usually I would do a class on a struct on top of this to be more clear, because right now it's not very clear if this represents a single thing. This represents a single asteroid, but it's not clear that if it represents a single asteroid or you know, multiple asteroids as it is right now. I think I'm still not sure. How is this supposed to? Oh no, this represents a single asteroid, but the Among Us map represents a single Among Us map with all the different map meshes. Yeah, you see what I mean here. It's a small thing, but it's quite confusing. So you know, you would probably want to do in this case something like a struct, maybe model, I guess, and then you will have a vector of objects inside. Maybe, let's say meshes, something like this, right? Yeah, because you know, a 3D model will have multiple meshes, so you will need to do something like this eventually. Okay, and then we load the stuff in the beginning, the font, and oh yeah, also said he has music. That's very nice. Okay, now let's look at the while function. Yeah, and actually at the end he clears the stuff. So nothing fancy there. Now the while function, again, here some regions would be nice. So splitting it into functions if that is necessary. Not necessary. I wouldn't do it necessarily for this project. It's quite a small, simple project. But some regions here would be very nice. Now, so for example, init stuff and delta time calculations. I will do something like this here. Let's say, yeah, something like this. You know what I mean? Then you just collapse this and don't care about that anymore. And also, I like the fact that he uses some lambdas here for some helpers. It's very nice. But yeah, like here you can basically have the gameplay code, and it's also very simple. Like it just moves stuff around. Yeah, it is of course a little bit hard coded, as you can see, but it's not a problem right now, right? Like this game is small, okay? So I would rather see something like this, like where everything is quite hard coded, instead of having something like way over engineered. Because obviously, like both options are wrong. Like you don't want too over engineered code, and you also don't want like too hard coded code. You want to be somewhere in the middle. The problem is that if you do too much over engineered code, it will be harder to go towards the middle, and also you spend a lot of time over engineering it. But if you start with simple code, first of all, you might actually leave it like this. Like the game is almost ready, like for this project. So there's no point in refactoring this necessarily. But if you do need to refactor this, so for example, instead of having something like this, you'd have maybe a transform. So as I said, maybe you'd have a struct model, and then it will have a vector of objects, which are meshes. Maybe you'd also have a position here, and then a way for this position to be applied automatically to all the objects, right? You would maybe do something like this instead of doing it manually here. This refactoring is quite easy. You know what I mean? Like, you can start with your code simple like this and hard code it, and then refactor it. And that's very nice, like nothing wrong with that. And then yeah, he has some logic to spam asteroids randomly. And then if he then removes asteroids that are far, and so on. Let's now look at the rendering logic. This is probably the interesting part. Okay, so again, I would like here a region, something like this, so I can more clearly separate the gameplay part from the rendering logic. And yeah, sure, you can place this into a function, potentially, maybe it's something like this, but just don't do that. Don't feel like you are forced to place things into functions. Like, you don't necessarily need to place this rendering thing into a separate function. Sometimes it helps, many times it helps, but it's not mandatory, right? I see a lot of people doing things like they would have like a rendering function for their engine and a update function. A lot of times those things go hand in hand. You might need to do some rendering. This is a simple project, so it works well. But a lot of times you will need to do some rendering things in the gameplay update. So don't feel like you are forced to split things in this way. Okay? Let's look. Things seem very simple here. So he's just, binding shaders, sending uniforms and stuff like that. And then drawing objects. seems like it also has some emissive materials. That's quite interesting. But yeah, nothing fancy for this 3D rendering. Let's look inside some helpers, because like there are many more files which most of them have to do with rendering. Okay, so this draw objects thing, yeah, nothing fancy here. Yeah, the only problem I can see here is that in the future, maybe you may need to implement something like something more complex in the rendering, like some optimizations, like maybe instance rendering, depending on the case. So, you know, this may need some refactoring here in the rendering pipeline, but you know, it's not a problem. Like, take things step by step, right? So for this scale of the project, how it looks now, it's actually perfect, I would say. Like, I know you might expect to trash on this code because it doesn't have enough abstractions, and it's very hard coded, but I like it more like this. Because in this way you will move slowly towards a good implementation, instead of forcing yourself to start with a super complex generic, you know, not hard-coded implementation. Those things don't usually end up working well if you try to force them from the beginning. So yeah, I really like the simplicity of how this project works. Before we take a look at text rendering, let's see if we find anything interesting in these structs here. Let's, for example, take a look at the 3D models thing. Okay, so the object. So I'm not really a fan of the fact that you force people to construct this object with a mesh. I would much rather have something like you don't force people to construct your object with something and then allow them to use like something like void I don't know, construct or create, and then this to take a mesh. I also have to see like how you handle memory for this, because you oh, okay, so basically what you do is you don't handle the mesh itself memory, you just take it as a reference and then you keep it. Okay, I see this. So you know, this can work if you are careful. Obviously you don't want to delete this. Yeah, so this is what we are doing. Yeah, this can work if you are careful to not delete these things. I also do something like this from time to time. It's not necessarily a problem. You don't necessarily need to do counting references. Again, so if so you need to load a 3D model, and then the object needs to have a reference to this 3D model. So you don't want the 3D model to be deleted before you delete the object, right? So you don't necessarily need counting references to solve this. For example, in this case, because you only have a few 3D models that you load at the beginning, these models here, you load them here, and then you never unload them until you get to the end of the game, which, by the way, you don't even need to unload them. Like, Windows will do it faster for you anyway. Because of that, you don't need to manage any memory for this game. Like, you shouldn't actually manage memory for this game. It's pointless. Like, it is impossible for this mesh to get deleted. Of course, for a more complex game, you will need to do some memory management. But right now, how things are here, it's actually perfect. No need to over-engineer your code if you don't need that, okay? So I like this thing. Except, you know, again, I would do maybe something like this. I like this more, because you can't make a vector of objects, like an empty vector of objects in this way, you know what I mean? Because they have to be already constructed. You can have empty objects, and it's just a little bit annoying. One more thing though, initialize everything to 0. And then, well, I know you didn't initialize it because you force the user to initialize it here, but still, always initialize everything to 0, just as a, convention, rule of thumb to say so. And then you'd also, if we do things, let's say my way, where we have this create here, because mesh can be 0, in the draw, we will need to do something like if we don't have a mesh, return. Oh, okay. Now we have we have some helpers here. Nothing fancy. This thing that I said that maybe should be refactored into... the reason this should be refactored into a struct, like I said 2 times already, struct model, let's say, is because it's way more understandable, right? It's the same thing. This thing and this thing, they're literally the same thing, but it's more understandable that this is a model that has, submodels inside. But here, you don't really understand, is this a model or are these multiple models of the same type? You know what I mean? It's way easier to see that, okay, this is one model here, but that has some models in this way, right? So this is a small refactoring that needs to be made. And then everything looks quite decent here. In the updates, nothing fancy. Let's take a look at a few more files. Let's see. So he has some. Okay, so yeah, I think he just got inspiration from me here. I like to make some random helpers like these things. Let's see. Yeah, let's move to text rendering actually. I think that's everything that was interesting in regarding other 3D stuff. It's just basic things. Again, here everything should be initialized to 0. This also should be to 0. And then again, like I would rather have a init function than force everyone to initialize it in the constructor. Just because, again, if you want to make a vector of these things, you can't have empty objects. But, it's not really mandatory. And then, you have a destroy method, which I actually like this way. I don't like using destructors for things like this. Because it allows me to copy them around more easily. And again, as you saw for this game, there's no point of doing any clearing of memory, since you need all the meshes in the entirety of the game, right? So, this again also look very simple. Let's look into text rendering. Well, again, everything should be 0. Also here, I won't go into too much detail into text rendering because it's quite complicated to understand for one video. In my advanced game dev course, actually, so let's see. I link below my my game dev courses because in this way they might have actually a discount for you. So in this last course I made, where I show you how to make a library, I also talk about text rendering quite a bit. It's quite annoying. And also, if you want to start OpenGL learning, I also have this one, which just does the bare minimum things. Let's say, like just the triangle. But it does that extremely well, right? So you can learn OpenGL for free online. But with this course, I basically take a lot of time explaining the very basic things very well. So in this way, it's easier for you to start, which is actually the hardest part of learning OpenGL. Like placing that damn triangle is very hard and very hard to understand, but you'll understand it better with this course. So check the links in the description for these things. But anyway, getting back to how he made text rendering. Okay, so it needs first of all a font info, and this is this is it. I would have renamed this into font. So this basically stores the font, right? So let's see. He just okay, he just opens the file, and then some basic font loading stuff. Again, I don't really want to get into too much detail here. We'll just look if it has something something weird going on that we can learn from. In the draw text, so how font rendering works usually is that you have a texture where each letter of the font will be somewhere in that texture, right? So it will look something like this. Fonts texture atlas. Yeah, something like this. And the idea is that you use a library to generate this texture, getting that information from a font file. So a font file won't be actually a texture, it will use some vector graphics to basically render these letters at any resolution possible. So this is what he's actually doing here. So when he's loading the font, he's using some, so he's using this STB library here to generate the font for himself, and then it will generate a simple OpenGL texture. And this font will also generate for himself some information about like where each letter is in that texture. And then all he has to do to render some letters is to place each letter individually as a different quad. So if I run the game for a second, and I also see he has a projection matrix for it, which is very useful actually, because you might want to do this in 3D. So yeah, so each letter here that you can see is actually a different quad. So once you extract that information, it's not that hard to render them. So you just render like one quad and then you move to the next one. But as a little tip, once you have something like this, it's quite easy to also render a shadow for it. So you would redraw everything again, but with a black color, and then you so you do that first, and then you draw everything on top, like you draw the shadow first with a little offset, and this will make the letters be more visible. And he splits this into two parts, which is something very nice. So he first just computes like where the letters should end up on the screen with this thing. Yeah, so he'll just take the information for each letter and then construct the triangles, and then we'll send that to the OpenGL. Here this needs to be stream draw actually. Yeah. So that's very nice. So instead of sending each quad individually, he has a vector of quads that he sends in one go to OpenGL. And that's very nice because you need to have as few draw calls as possible, and this is what he does here, which I like a lot. Sorry, but why stream draw here? Well, he had dynamic draw, which is made to tell OpenGL that this buffer will get modified. But this is not what he's doing here. He's actually completely replacing the buffer. So dynamic draw is actually for using GL buffer subdata. So you basically, modify parts of the data. But when you every frame, when you replace the entire data, like he does here, use stream draw. And this is actually a quite optimized way of drawing things. So every time, every frame, you send new data, completely new data to OpenGL. And because you tell OpenGL that you are replacing the entire buffer in this way, like GL buffer data will replace your buffer, and you also place this flag here, OpenGL can do some nice optimizations here. And yeah, restoring the 3D rendering state, it's always good to not what's the word? Like you should not rely on the previous state. Like you should always set everything for your rendering, and then also reset, unbind your things, unbind the shader and stuff like that to work in a very clean way in OpenGL. But yeah, that's about it. Very solid project. Again, you should make projects in order to learn. And also, again, check the links in the description if you want some more help from me, from my courses. See you in the next coding review.